Death by Meeting, a leadership fable about solving the most painful problem in business, by Patrick Lencioni. Introduction. Have you ever sat in a room, looked around at the faces of your colleagues, and felt your soul slowly begin to leak out of you? The clock on the wall seems to mock you, its hands moving with agonizing slowness. Someone is talking, droning on about something that feels completely disconnected from the real work waiting for you back at your desk. You're not just bored. You are experiencing a special kind of professional despair. This is the misery of the modern meeting. It's a feeling so universal, it's become a running joke in our culture. We complain about meetings, we dread them, we do everything we can to avoid them. And yet, for most of us, they are the very center of our work. The author of our book today, Patrick Lencioni, makes a powerful comparison. Imagine a surgeon saying, "I'd love my job if I didn't have to do surgery," or a professional football player saying, "This career would be great if it weren't for the games." It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Well, Lencioni argues that when leaders and managers complain about meetings, they're saying the exact same thing. For those who lead, meetings aren't an interruption of the work. Meetings are the work. They are the operating room, the stage, the playing field where the most important decisions are made. So, if we hate them, if we find them tedious, unproductive, and soul-crushing, how can we possibly be leading our organizations to success? The hard truth, Lencioni says, is that we can't. Bad meetings lead to bad decisions, and bad decisions are the fast track to mediocrity. But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if we could transform the most painful problem in business into a powerful, compelling, and even energizing experience? Today, we're going to step into a story. It's a fable about a man named Casey McDaniel, a good man running a good company that was slowly, quietly, dying of boredom. His story is a mirror, and in it, we might just see a reflection of our own frustrations. But more importantly, we'll discover a secret, a contrarian, unconventional way to rescue our work, our teams, and ourselves from death by meeting. By the end of our time together, you won't just see meetings differently. You will understand the hidden psychology of why they fail, and you'll hold the key to making them the most powerful tool in your arsenal. Book summary. Our story begins with a man in a state of quiet panic. His name is Casey McDaniel, and he's about to walk into a meeting that he believes will determine the entire fate of his career, his company, and his financial future. He feels physically ill, wondering how his life could have unraveled so quickly. To understand his fear, you first have to understand Casey. By all accounts, Casey was an extraordinary man, but only an ordinary CEO. He was the kind of person everyone genuinely liked, a devoted husband and father, a pillar of his community, a good and helpful friend. It was almost impossible not to admire the man. Which is what made his limitations as a leader so mystifying. Casey had built his company, Yip Software, from scratch. A former college golfer whose professional career was cut short by a case of the yips, a nerve-wracking inability to putt steadily, Casey channeled his energy into his other love, computers. He created the most realistic golf video game the market had ever seen. Thanks to his deep knowledge of the sport and an accidental endorsement from a pro golfer friend, Yip Software became a runaway success. Over 10 years, the company grew to nearly 200 employees, housed in a beautiful historic building in Monterey, California. Yip was the darling of the town, a profitable and award-winning company. From the outside, it looked like a dream. But inside, something was off. The firm was an underachiever. And it all started with Casey. He was content with just squeaking by. As long as the numbers added up at the end of the quarter and he could get in a few rounds of golf, Casey was happy. His employees, in turn, had grown complacent. They knew the company would always hit its targets, but just barely. There was a surprising lack of excitement for a company that made fun, state-of-the-art video games. A subtle mediocrity pervaded the entire organization. If you wanted to find the source of this malaise, you needed to look no further than the executive weekly staff meeting. The meetings were a ritual of pain. Lethargic, unfocused, passionless. The executive team knew their weekly get-together was tedious, but they just accepted it as a necessary evil of doing business. They never imagined that the entire culture of their company had come to mirror those meetings. Every important topic, from marketing strategy to competitive threats, was dragged into that room, where it was drained of all its energy and momentum before drifting away, unresolved. This was the state of things, and it might have continued that way forever. But things have a way of changing. The first domino fell when the new head of HR, Michelle, presented a survey showing that employees were largely unconcerned about the business. This data rattled the executives. Suddenly, everyone had a theory. The head of product development thought people were burned out. The head of sales argued they needed to enter new markets. But it was the CFO, Tim, who voiced the most sensitive theory. After years of winning awards, maybe the employees were wondering where their financial upside was. The idea struck a nerve with Casey. He'd always taken pride in providing for his employees, and the thought that they felt under-rewarded was a painful pill to swallow. For the first time, he wondered if he was letting them down. And so, in a moment of guilt-driven inspiration, Casey made an announcement he would soon regret. He was going to take the company public to give his people the financial payoff they deserved. But then, an easier path seemed to appear. A mirage in the desert. The call came from J.T. Harrison, the head of business development at PlaySoft, the nation's second-largest video game maker. PlaySoft was built on games for kids and wanted to enter the adult sports market where Yip dominated. They saw Yip as an underperformer, a perfect, cheap acquisition. Casey, wary of typical game companies, agreed to sell, but only under 3 conditions. He would run Yip autonomously, keep his management team, and maintain the Yip brand. To his surprise, PlaySoft immediately agreed. Casey thought he had found the best of both worlds, a financial win for his employees without losing control of the company he had built. He could not have been more wrong. For a few weeks after the deal, Yip employees were giddy with their new paper wealth. And then, the market collapsed. PlaySoft stock plummeted. The mood in the office dropped lower than it had been in years. The financial windfall had evaporated. It was then that Casey received the second call from J.T. Harrison. There was no sympathy in Harrison's voice. Just a cold, simple request. I'd like to come out and see you next week. I just thought I'd drop by and sit in on your next staff meeting. Casey tried to deflect, suggesting a one-on-one meeting instead, but Harrison was insistent. As he hung up the phone, Casey could hear the faint sounds of his world beginning to fall apart. The day of the meeting, J.T. Harrison arrived like a foreign invader. Casey started the meeting his usual way, half joking that no one had sent him agenda items. He passed out the agenda he'd created himself: expense policies, strategic planning, management training, and a few other items. What followed was a masterclass in mediocrity. For the next hour, the team dispassionately discussed expense reports. J.T. seemed to have tuned out completely. Then they moved to the strategic plan. The discussion was more interesting, touching on competitive pressures and market trends, but J.T. noticed something was missing. Passion, urgency. It sounded like they were discussing a case study about someone else's business, not their own company's future. The only animated conversation of the entire 2 hours happened near the end, when the head of sales brought up an issue about magazine advertising they thought they had settled last week. For a few brief moments, there was energy in the room as they debated the timing of the ad spend. But just as quickly, Casey shut it down. "Okay, we have 5 minutes left," he announced, "and we haven't even talked about management training, stock reporting, or competitive analysis." In a frantic rush to the finish line, they glossed over 3 massive topics in under 5 minutes. The CFO gave a 30-second warning about SEC violations. Casey relayed a message about a mandatory 3-day training seminar, leaving no time for questions or objections. And with the clock ticking, he asked for the competitive report. They learned that 2 major competitors were launching new games aimed at stealing their market share. "So what do we do?" someone asked. Casey looked at his watch. "We talk about it next time." It's noon, and just like that, the meeting was over. People scattered like 4th graders at recess. JT watched them leave, amazed. He had just witnessed a team of competent executives sit through 2 hours of mind-numbing conversation, touch on critical topics, and then let them drift away without the slightest hint of frustration. He didn't know that the real decisions at Yip were never made in meetings. They were made later, in one-on-one sessions in Casey's office. The meeting itself was just a tedious formality. A painful one. A few days later, the real blow came. Not from Harrison himself, but from one of his young assistants. The message was chillingly corporate. JT Harrison would be attending their staff meetings for the rest of the summer to get more acquainted with the business. He might pop in unannounced. Casey knew exactly what this meant. It was an invasion. A hostile takeover in slow motion. Just as this professional crisis hit, a personal one followed. His loyal, steady assistant, Gia, tearfully announced that she was pregnant with twins and had to go on immediate bed rest. Casey was happy for her, but a thought screamed in his mind, "What am I going to do?" He was losing one of the few stable presences in his life at the worst possible moment. It was Casey's wife, Patricia, who planted the seed of an idea. "Don't just get a temp," she suggested. "Find someone different, someone who can add value in a new way." And then, through a stroke of serendipity, a solution appeared. An old family friend, Ken Peterson, reached out to arrange dinner. At that dinner, while Casey was reluctantly recounting his troubles, Patricia mentioned his need for a temporary assistant. Ken had an idea. "You know who would be great for this job? Will?" Will Peterson was Ken's son. 27 years old, brilliant, and a little lost. He had degrees in psychology, business, and film, had worked in advertising, and was now trying to figure out if he wanted to be on the creative or business side of Hollywood. His mother described him as someone who could create order out of chaos. His father said he was the hardest worker he'd ever known. He was massively overqualified, but he was out of money and needed a break. It seemed like a perfect, if unusual, fit. Casey hired him. What he didn't know was that he wasn't just hiring an administrative assistant. He was hiring a catalyst. Because Will had a secret. From a young age, Will had suffered from a psychological disorder, something like Tourette's or OCD, that caused him to make inappropriate, brutally honest comments at the worst possible times. For years, medication had controlled it, allowing him to become a disciplined and well-liked success. But just 3 weeks before his interview with Casey, Will had decided to stop taking his medication, wanting to see if he could manage the disorder on his own. In a few weeks, the full effects would return. On his first real day of work, Will walked in to find Casey sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen, almost catatonic. After a long silence, Casey finally looked up and confessed. He showed Will the email he had just received from JT Harrison. Will read the message. It was a smoking gun. JT. Got right to the point. I'm having doubts about your ability to run your division. But mostly, it has to do with my visit a few weeks ago. I have rarely seen such an unproductive, uninspired meeting in my career. This absurdly boring meeting was no longer just a symptom of mediocrity. It was now the evidence that could cost Casey his job and his company. At that moment, Will Peterson decided he would do whatever it took to help this good man save his life's work. Will sat in on the next Monday meeting, determined to observe. It was a sequel to the horror film JT had witnessed. The meeting started 12 minutes late. The first 15 minutes were spent debating the location of the summer picnic. Then came a 30-minute presentation on management training to which no one paid attention. An hour was spent on the budget, including a 10-minute debate over whether to buy a paper shredder to save $72 a month. Will took constant, copious notes, not to record the minutes, but as a coping mechanism to keep himself from screaming. Finally, with only a half hour left, they got to something that mattered, a presentation from the head of marketing, Connor, about rebranding the company to fight off new competition. It was fascinating and critical. Will was hooked. But then, Tim, the CFO, interrupted to ask about the budget. The conversation immediately derailed from strategy into a pointless discussion about departmental budget allocations for the picnic. It was at that moment that Will's pen ran out of ink. His last defense was gone. The disorder, the honesty, the unfiltered truth came rushing out. He spoke up, his voice cutting through the haze of complacency. "Excuse me, but does anyone else think we should finish talking about rebranding this company before we waste another precious hour in pointless discussion about the damn picnic?" The room went dead silent. Will, horrified at what he'd done, tried to stop, but he couldn't. "I'm sorry, but these meetings are amazing," he continued, the words tumbling out. "You guys spend more time getting less done and avoiding anything remotely interesting." Everyone stared, stunned. Casey, seeing the shock, quickly called for a 10-minute break, leaving him alone in the room with Will. When the door closed, Will looked up, expecting to be fired. But Casey was smiling. "Wow," he said. "Where did that come from?" Will confessed everything: the disorder, the medication, his struggle to contain himself. Casey listened with remarkable kindness and understanding. He wasn't angry. He wasn't offended. Perhaps he was relieved. The truth, however bluntly it had arrived, was finally on the table. The unspoken disaster of their meetings had finally been spoken. And in that moment of chaos, created by a brilliant assistant with a psychological disorder, the possibility of change was finally born. Commentary. Patrick Lencioni's Fable is so powerful because, on some level, we have all been Casey McDaniel. We have all sat in those lifeless rooms, feeling the energy drain away. We've seen important topics get pushed to the end of the agenda and then rushed through in the final minutes. We've endured pointless debates about trivial matters while the real, high-stakes issues go unaddressed. The genius of death by meeting is that it frames this universal frustration not as a minor annoyance, but as a critical leadership failure. A company's culture, Lencioni shows us, is a direct reflection of its meetings. If your meetings are boring, your company will be boring. If they are unfocused, your company will be unfocused. If they are devoid of healthy conflict and passion, your organization will be a place of quiet, polite mediocrity. The core lesson from the book is that we have meetings all wrong. We think of them as a single, monolithic activity. We cram everything: strategic brainstorming, tactical updates, administrative announcements, and everything in between, into one weekly staff meeting and then wonder why it's a disaster. Lencioni argues that our meetings fail for two fundamental reasons. First, they lack drama. Not melodrama, but legitimate, focused conflict. A good meeting, like a good movie, needs stakes. It needs a central question that people care about solving. Most meetings are like a movie with no plot. The second reason they fail is because they lack contextual structure. We're trying to do too many different kinds of work in one setting. It's like trying to cook a gourmet dinner, change the oil in your car, and file your taxes all on the same kitchen table at the same time. You're bound to make a mess. So how do we begin to fix this? The story of Casey and Will gives us the starting point. Here are a few simple actions you can take, inspired by their journey. First, just acknowledge the pain. The turning point in the story is when Will has his outburst. He says the one thing everyone is thinking but no one is brave enough to say. The first step to fixing your meetings is to have an honest conversation with your team. Ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad are our meetings, and why? Just putting the truth on the table can be revolutionary. Second, find the drama. Before your next meeting, ask yourself, what is the single most important issue we are facing as a team right now? Is it a competitive threat? A new opportunity? A project that's falling behind? Structure the meeting around that central, dramatic question. Give your team a compelling reason to be engaged. Don't let them discuss picnic logistics when the future of the company is at stake. And third, start to separate your concerns. Look at your agenda. Is this a tactical meeting to review progress and clear obstacles? Or is this a strategic meeting to debate the future? Lencioni's full model, which he explains after the Fable, provides a brilliant framework for different kinds of meetings, each with its own purpose, timing, and structure. You don't need to implement his whole system overnight. Just start by recognizing that a single meeting can't be all things to all people. In the end, Casey McDaniel's journey wasn't just about learning a new format for meetings. It was about waking up. It was about a leader realizing that the activity he dreaded most was actually the most important thing he did. The heart of any team, any department, any company, beats strongest in the room where its leaders gather to make decisions, solve problems, and fight for a common cause. Lencioni's powerful story asks us a simple question: is that heartbeat strong, passionate, and clear? Or is it slowly, quietly, fading away? That was a summary of Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni. We've certainly explored the core of the story today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic of this book is in feeling the story unfold and then connecting it to the practical, actionable model that Lencioni lays out in the second half. It's in those quiet moments, when a piece of dialogue or a simple insight hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, I truly encourage you to grab a copy, because reading it isn't just about learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change how you lead and work. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that these journeys are making a difference, and it ensures you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.